Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second session of this morning of the Innovation Fund Day we have. The objective of this session, in particular, is to explore how innovative clean tech can successfully reach financial close. I'm therefore pleased as well that we have a number of distinguished speakers today who represent different sectors, from financial experts from both the public sector and the private sector, commercial banks, private funds, as well as industrial players. But before we start, maybe let me quickly introduce them to you. So I'm happy to welcome at this session first Christian Holzleiner, who's head of unit in the Commission responsible for finance, for innovation and land use at the European Commission's Directorate for Climate Action. Welcome, Christian. Then we have Gretchen Rudolph, who's director in the Bank ABN AMRO's Natural Resource Coverage Team, servicing large corporate clients in the chemicals and renewable energy sector. Welcome, Gretchen. Then we have Fred van Boningen, who's managing partner at the Chrysalix Venture Capital Fund, and whose experience is mainly on technology and innovation, but I'll say a bit more in a second. Then we have Mr. De Marais, who worked, who's from ArcelorMittal, where he's vice president and as head of technology strategy, and also chairman of the European Steel Technology Platform, which represents the European steel stakeholders. And then last but not least, we have José Pinheiro, who is an expert on offshore winds and who's the moment director of the Windfloat Atlantic project in the company EDP Renewables. So I'm really pleased that these people are with us. So our panel will explain to you how the Innovation Fund will support clean tech, how to ensure that the innovative projects are financially viable while bringing benefit to the climate. And then in particular, our two industry representatives, which are Mr. De Marais and Mr. Pinheiro, they will share the experience of successfully attracting finance for highly innovative projects in clean technologies. So our different speakers will step in a second, and that will take us through the first hour, and then we have time for questions. But let me tell you as well that don't wait until the end to launch your questions. We're using Slido today. And so I would invite all of you, if you have questions during the speakers or during the sessions, please send them already now so that the colleagues can really look at them and that we can respond to them in an efficient way at the end. So thanks for that. And so without any further ado, I propose that we start. And then our first speaker will be Christian Holzleiner, who's head, as I said, who's head of the unit responsible for finance, for innovation and land use in DG Klima in the Commission. Christian has got a very long experience in finance and in climate-related action, so I'm really pleased that he is there today to help us. And so, Christian, could you please tell us how the Innovation Fund could complement private and public funding for industrial projects and could help developing an ecosystem for massive investment in clean technology, please? Christian, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. Many thanks for the nice introduction, Dirk. Very happy to be here, of course. I mean, as we are organizing it, and but also big thanks to the first panel. I think it was a really fascinating and very good discussion, and maybe I also want to build a little bit on that and bring it now to a more operational level. On the next slide, we show you like all the sectors where we can invest. So the Innovation Fund is here to bring those technologies to the market that we need in 2050 for a climate neutral Europe. So if you have a disruptive clean tech and you want to scale it up to commercial size, it's us. Please come to us. And we cover a wide range of clean tech. I think all the examples that you also heard in the first panel are here. We are still into renewable energy. We are into refining, into innovative approaches to wind, to solar, to really also go further down the cost curve there. We are, of course, here for carbon capture, use and storage. So for really making Europe the first place in the world where you can see an CCS industry that is dedicated to capturing CO2 from industrial plants, like cement, like hydrogen, production, and then to store it here or to reuse it for other purposes. Then, of course, we have all our steel, chemical industry and all the other sectors that we have covered under the energy-intensive industries. And Marco has explained very well the challenges that the European industry here has, and that we want to support them to have the global leadership in clean tech. And here, what I want to emphasize, we're also very much about substitute products. So we also want to see into alternative products, like, for example, if you look into construction material, woody construction material, where you can also store a lot of CO2, is also something we would be very interested in. And then finally, energy storage, smart grids, what was also mentioned this morning, both in the application as well as in the production of batteries, of battery components. This is also something we want to invest in. And the way we want to select projects is very much as a private sector. So we want to behave as a private investor. With the only difference is that we don't want to have a monetary return, but we want to have that return in the emission reductions. So on the next slide, if you look at our selection criteria, the first one is really the GHG emission avoidance. We want to get down these emissions. So if your project is into a deep decarbonization, into maybe completely avoiding fossil fuels, this is something that we value. And then if you look at the other criteria, I think these are criteria every private investor would look at. It's a degree of innovation. How disruptive is the technology? And at the same time, we want to know about the project maturity. As every investor, we want to have the most innovative thing done tomorrow. And I think with us, it's maybe even more imperative to do this because we have public money. And we don't want to sit on our public money, but once we invest it, we want to see quickly that there is financial close, that this project takes off. And of course, what was also said this morning, what is so important when discussing about project maturity is to also look at, okay, are there offtake contracts? How does the value chain look like? And we're very much, and this is also something that we do a lot, to talk about, okay, how can a CCS industry look like in Europe? How can a hydrogen industry look like in Europe? So again, it's not only about the technology, it's also about getting it done. And it's building up completely new supply chains. Of course, there are worries about, okay, from where do I get my renewable energy? From where do I get my green hydrogen? Do I have more suppliers? Is there enough infrastructure? CO2 pipelines, hydrogen pipelines, that are all also important topics. Then, of course, scalability. How big is the market? How big is the future market there? And first in Europe, but then also globally. As I said, I mean, one objective of the Innovation Fund is also that we become, our industry, that you become the global leader in clean tech. And then finally, also this plays into it, we look at cost efficiency. The success of solar and so on, of course, builds on that we get down those costs, that we go down the cost curve. And in this, I think we've come up now with our call text, and we present some methodologies, for example, how to calculate greenhouse gas emission avoidance, how to evaluate the cost efficiency of this clean tech. And I hope that this is something that can also be interesting for private investors, so that we can set a certain standard there in how do you deal with the benefits of such a project, with the cleanliness, but also with the cost side. I know that a lot of people are worried about the risks related to CCS, related to hydrogen. We want also to present here methodologies. How can you compare the cost of these technologies to the current market price? So there, I hope we can also give something then a little bit back to the private investors and really create a community around, set new standards. How can you assess these projects? On the next slide, it's not only that when selecting the projects, we want to be close to the thinking of private investors, but also when we follow up projects. What we really look is at delivery. So we want to see these emission avoidance coming on. So we want to see how does the project go along the project cycle based on the certain milestones. So we want to be there at financial close with the other investors in deciding, okay, should we go ahead with this project or do we switch to another one? And we are ready to take a lot of risk in the first phase of the project development. 40% of our grant can be paid out here. But then, once you are in operation, we want really to see that you carry through, that you stay on the market, that you deliver the promised emission savings. And then you get the full share of our grant. So also here, we want to be together with private investors. We want to look at the same indicators, because as I said before, we have very much the same interest that these projects go quickly to financial close, are viable, and get into production. And I think we learned a lot, and I think there we can also share some experiences from our previous program, the NER 300, where we sometimes learned the hard way how difficult it is, and also in more difficult economic circumstances, to pull off such projects. So I come to my last point, and maybe the most important one for this conference on the next slide, is the very aim of this conference here is really to start a community around the Innovation Fund and to have a dialogue between the projects and the investors. And I think that went already quite well in the first panel, and I see an appetite for that, and that we definitely want to nurture. So we want to be very open to cooperate with public and private investors. So we want that you come with your project to us, so that you say, okay, there's an interesting project, I want to invest into this, okay, but I'm missing money for that. The Innovation Fund could be that. And we would be very thankful for you that you give us this signal from the private sector or as a public promotional bank, that you say, okay, I think that's good if there's somebody who takes a little bit more risk. And that could be us. So we would very much look forward also to bring in your knowledge into the evaluation of our project. And of course, we would hope then that you would also take our evaluation, once we selected a project, as a quality signal that makes it easier for you to invest in this project. So there we want to be very open, but we really also, let's see how this works out with the first call and then later on, but really to see it in a very seamless way, that you come with projects that are interesting for you, that you want to invest in, and then we maybe get in second, or it's the other way around. We first say, okay, look, we think this is really an interesting one, and then you trust us and bring in your money. On the second point, it's not only us, the Innovation Fund, but there are other public funding programs. And this is always, I think, a big discussion is how do public funding programs work with each other? And we published yesterday a paper on how can you cumulate the Innovation Fund with other public funding. I'm quite a fan of the paper, because in very basic terms, it shows you how that can work. And it also goes into different situations, what we also discussed before, the way, okay, how can you combine the Innovation Fund to finance the more innovative part of Cleantech, and how could the Connecting Europe facility finance the infrastructure? And there we will have one big advantage in the future, that the Innovation Fund and infrastructure programs will be under the same roof. This is in the agency that Dirk Beckers is heading. And we can, I think, over the next years, they really get good synergies and give you a very good offer. Of course, the cooperation with state aid is sometimes a bit more tedious because you need really to look at the accumulation rules of the different state aid instruments. And there, I think we still need to make a bit of progress, but the paper gives you first indications there. And then finally, what comes very clearly out of our analysis, something that works very well, is the combination of the Innovation Fund with InvestEU or other loan programs. And we have with the EIB really a very good partner here on our side. We will also work together with them on the project development. We also have here in the panel some examples of where we combined the NER 300, a grant, with then financial support under Innofin EDP. And we hope that that can be a successful model also in the future for the Innovation Fund with InvestEU, but also with national promotional banks. So this is also why I'm happy to see several national promotional banks here today at the conference, because I think what we can do with InvestEU, we can also do together with your local knowledge. I think the last point that I always like to emphasize, and where I would very much like to invite you, is to work as evaluators for us. So we have these panels of independent experts that will look at our project, and we want to have there the technical experience. We want to have the experience in greenhouse gas emission avoidance, in life cycle analysis. We want to have the experience on the financial side. So if you're interested, please don't hesitate to apply with Dirk Beckers, with INEA, to get there more information. I think this is also something where over time we want to really also set up a community. And yeah, so I think I've shown you here several routes how we can effectively and in practice cooperate. I think you find that interesting. It gets you thinking, and yes, very much looking forward to a very good cooperation, and that we all together can really make Europe a leader in clean tech. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Christian, for this very inspiring, I would say, opening speech. I think you highlighted very well the different sectors that we are expecting proposals in, the importance of the emission reduction, of course, you highlighted, and then the fact that financial close is extremely important and the cooperation between the different sectors. So I would say thanks for this. So we have, there are some questions coming in, but as we said, we'll keep them for the end. Unfortunately, with your enthusiasm, you've gone a bit longer than I had hoped. So I have to ask the next speakers to really try to stick to the timing. Otherwise, we will be running a bit too much over time. But okay, without any further ado, I would like to present the second speaker, which is Gretchen Rudolph. She's director in the ABN AMRO Bank in the Netherlands on natural resources coverage team that are servicing large corporate clients in the chemicals renewable energy sector. Mrs. Rudolph has got more than 13 years of general banking experience in various regions around the world, with a big part focused on the financial structuring and execution of transactions in the energy, metals and mining and chemical sector. Mrs. Rudolph, or Gretchen, could you please explain how the banking sector could contribute to the decarbonization of the EU's industry, and how finance from banking can work together with public finance to support clean tech investment? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here at the launch of the Innovation Fund today. In terms of the role that commercial banks can play in bringing to the market technologies to decarbonize Europe, as a bank, sustainability is really at the core of what we do. It is therefore in our interest to support our client base in decarbonizing their respective industries within which we are also active. Within the ABN AMRO National Resources team, we focus on energy, metals, and energy, metals, and chemical sectors. And within that, we've recently had a massive drive to invest in these sectors and focus on projects within the energy transition. I believe within this drive, banks also have various roles to play. So not only as arrangers of capital, but also as providers of capital through various debt instruments. In that respect, we play a role in tapping into a large investor base, which we have relationships with, but also then putting our clients together and partnering our clients where there is a need for partnerships within this transition. Outside of debt, a lot of banks, and such as ABN AMRO, also has their own energy transition fund, which invests in equity capital in companies and early stage projects within viable business models that contribute to a low carbon future. They also, for instance, look at projects which are currently not bankable, and help to get these projects to bankability in future. So I'd like to use an example. For instance, if you look at where wind and solar started, banks together with public financiers had a very large role to play in bringing these technologies to market and upping the learning curve. Once the early adopters and the financiers got themselves comfortable with that risk, the momentum starts growing and more investors start joining the party. And where we are today, there's actually an overcrowded sector for sort of common and known renewable energy technologies, with ample liquidity being available in the market. So I believe there's absolutely no reason we can't use this as a prototype for the development of further innovative technologies such as hydrogen and CCUS as an example going forward. In terms of the challenges, I think innovative projects are mainly considered to be equity risk. And this is where I see the role of DFIs, governments, and venture capital funds playing a larger role, because if you look at where commercial banks are on the risk curve, it is a little bit lower in that extent. And when we do look at innovative technologies, we then assess them on the same merits as proven technologies. And we have to take into account the various risks these projects of bringing these projects to the market, which need to be mitigated. Once these risks are in effect mitigated, we then get banks, especially banks and other investors, up the learning curve to then replicate these financing structures and mobilize further capital. The challenge is that we need one project to be successful in order to build the track record, and then have other financing institutions follow. When we look at sort of assessing projects, we start with a strong project, and we normally need strong sponsors with stable cash flows to ensure that the main risks, such as technology risk, regulatory risk, market risk, and commercial risks are mitigated. And this is not very different from other banks or commercial banks in that sense. With that, we see that closer alignment between the various institutions, whether it be commercial banks, project sponsors, or technology providers, are very key within the early stage of these projects, to make sure that everyone understands those risks and the risks that need to be covered at the beginning of the projects, which technical issues need to be accounted for with early technology, for instance. Because once you have all these checks and balances in place, everyone is on the same page, and it makes it a lot easier for risk teams to get themselves comfortable, and for these projects to be successfully implemented.
Okay, Thank you, Gretchen. Thanks for indeed informing us how the bank is taking care of partnerships, organizing them, how you look at projects to get them to a bankable stage if they're not there yet, and which are the challenges that we see, and how you go about it during the assessing of the project to mitigate the risk. So thanks for this input from your side. I'll propose to move straight to the third speaker, and that's Fred van Boningen, who is, as I mentioned before, he's managing partner of the Chrysalix Venture Capital Fund. He has a very long career in the industry, and a few of the companies where he worked is Royal Dutch Shell and ExxonMobil, and his experiences in technology, innovation, and bringing technology to the market. So, Mr. van Boningen or Fred, could you give us the perspective of the private investors, and in particular tell us more about the sectors where your fund is active and the key conditions which make a project attractive to private investors?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to make a contribution to this important panel. Let me first make an observation that I think that it's extremely encouraging to hear that both the financial sector and governments are moving from what I would call the business as usual phase into a transition phase, and start to contemplate the different instruments that they can deploy to help us to move into a low carbon economy. Am I actually audible, Dirk? Because I see you. Is the technology working okay?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay,
It was just
fine.
one of the colleagues had a question for me. So sorry, Fred, go ahead.
No worries. I just wanted to check if everything is.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, great. So that's extremely encouraging. Two words on Chrysalix as an introduction, and I'll come back to your question on the funds. So Chrysalix has been in Cleantech for close to 20 years. For example, we invested in carbon capture more than 10 years ago. We invested in concentrated solar more than 10 years ago, and even deep tech like fusion, which is actually making a comeback into the mix, also more than 10 years ago. What I mean to say by that is that the Cleantech 1.0, we have lived through that, and I think we have a sort of a deep experience with the problems of Cleantech 1.0 that can be summarized as moving through the innovation chasms. The first one is getting something out of the lab into the real world, and the second one is scaling it up, and that's where the problem lied in the past, because when the substantial sums of money, private money, are necessary for pilot plans and subsequently for the scale up, then the availability of that capital was very scarce. So it's very encouraging to see that there's more appetite, and it's central to our thesis for the future, for the coming 10 years, the decade that where it needs to happen, that there will be more access to non-dilutive capital. And I think some of the speakers already alluded to that. And that is for us a motivation to double down actually on the technology side. So what we did is, coming to your question, Dirk, on how these funds work, what we did is we took some time to combine our experience and learning from the past and recent analysis to analyze the key decarbonization levers of all the hard to abate sectors. I won't name them because I think that those are relatively evident, but of course it would include indeed steel, but also cement, oil and gas, chemicals, shipping, and etc. And then we matched it up with technology and universities globally, and started to work through that and build an ecosystem, for example, with technology research firms, but also Rocky Mountain Institute and others, to create this ecosystem that can actually enable an efficient handoff between these different innovation chasms. So that's one. The second one I would like to note, and keeping in mind the time, of course, is to note is something very significant. That is these companies putting carbon neutrality out there as an objective for 2030 or 2050. And that's relatively new. So you put it out there, you say, I want to become carbon neutral. But then our thinking is you need to have a strategy in place. And not only have to a strategy in place, but your investors will actually ask you about your plans, concrete plans in terms of the capital allocation. So it trickles down from having this objective to concrete innovation, technology, roadmaps, and capital allocation. And that's another very encouraging sign, because that's something that, in combination with societal pressure and investor pressure, will actually create the right conditions for low carbon economy in general, and particularly also for decarbonization of industrial sectors. As a last observation, and this is to Christian's introduction, of course, if you think about decarbonization at the highest abstraction level, you're thinking about efficiency, electrification or fuel change, CCUS, indeed, bringing the carbon molecule in circular loops or starting to use it in materials or products, but also recycling, circular economy, because lowering the virgin content of products is also a way of looking at decarbonization. But I want to make a last comment on CCS in particular. I understand that from Christian's introduction that that's a big part of the thinking behind the fund also. I just wanted to note that the clusters that we see emerging globally have 4 characteristics. One is, of course, the concentration of high quality sources of CO2. The other one is infrastructure, transport infrastructure. The third one is the availability of geological structures to store it. But the fourth one is, of course, the economic framework. So the carbon credits or the economic framework to make it bankable. And I think that's why it's so important to create this ecosystem, because if you don't have these 4 conditions in place, the cluster will not emerge. And frankly, the clusters that we see emerge are not immediately in Europe; they're elsewhere. They're in California, they're in Asia, in some places. So I think we need to work hard and coordinate our actions and make sure that the right framework conditions come into place. Similarly, with the hydrogen economy, of course, it's a similar issue. It's a systemic issue. So demand creation, where government can play a role, but also the backbone. And so I'm very much encouraged by these type of initiatives and bringing the industry and government closer together and start to work in sync with the financial institutions as well. Thank you, Dirk.
Thank you, Fred. I think it was very nice for me as well to learn how you see things from the private angle and the private sector, the importance to develop the ecosystems and the cooperation issue. So I think thanks for your input, which we will definitely as well take into account in our working methods for the future. So thanks for that. So let me now move on to our 4th speaker, which is Karel de Mare, who worked for the biggest part of his career where he is still today at ArcelorMittal, where he is Vice President as Head of Technology Strategy, and is also Chairman of the European Steel Technology Platform, which represents the European steel stakeholders. So Karel, could you maybe tell us a bit more about the Steelanol project, which is a project about biofuel production from waste gas coming from the steel making, and which is definitely a successful Cleantech project that benefited from EU funding from Innofin, EDP and Earth 300. And could you maybe as well give your views or explain how the Innovation Fund can improve the landscape for EU Cleantech? Karel, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks also, thank you, Stef, for the invitation and opportunity to speak. Indeed, a very exciting project on Cleantech. I have a couple of slides just to share them. Hopefully that works. Yeah, you see the screen, Dirk?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, good. And I'm going to move to presentation, but yeah, very quickly because time is running fast. But indeed, so I think I can also speak for the other colleagues in steel companies. We all want to move to carbon neutrality, and in ArcelorMittal we made a plan to reduce 30% in 2030 and even carbon neutrality 2050 based on 3 big drivers. And Christian, you mentioned them also: carbon capture storage, clean electricity use directly or indirectly through hydrogen, green hydrogen, and also this whole CCU, circular carbon chemical recycling is part of it. And it's in this third chapter that we have started already 5 years ago the steel and oil project, which is one of the 5 big demonstrators that ArcelorMittal is currently developing in order to really make sure, Fred, that our strategy will work and that we can reach the goals that we have set. So just steel and oil Torero, we started indeed with steel and oil part and added Torero part in order to be really fully circular, and I come back on that because that was one of our challenges. So technology is to take steel waste gases, which are still containing a lot of hydrogen and a lot of carbon, and convert that into a chemical product. It's much easier said than done. And the technology is really new. It's a bio-based technology. And then we added also at the entry of the blast furnace, we added also technology to use waste material, and in this case, waste wood from municipalities, and convert that into a kind of coal type of carbon, which can substitute the fossil coal in the furnace. And the combination of the two, in fact, is the project which we have developed together with Innofin, EDP, in order to get a financial close. So technology as such is really innovative. It's only 15 years that the company LanzaTech started with looking to microbes which are converting carbon monoxide and hydrogen in a water basin into ethanol. That started 15 years ago. We started to work in 2011 with them. And in 2015, we launched this project after a number of pilot and smaller scale projects to really scale it up. And I think the biggest technological risk there was really in the scale, finding the minimum scale needed to be financially possible to do the project and to operate the plant with good costs, but small enough to minimize the risk. So you see here the steel and oil plant, how it's designed, and you also see the construction site ongoing. The big innovation is in the green, large bio reactors, as we call them. These are water tanks with microbes who are living on the waste gas. Waste gas is a kind of feed for them, and they continuously produce ethanol. They recover all the energy, which is also produced by the microbes. And then I can come to a bit to explain the key figures, but also the challenges. So it's really exciting. It's 120,000 tons of waste wood, which is currently incinerated in the region. We will convert that into a fossil coal substitute, that we don't need coal anymore. At the end, we will produce 80 million liters of, let's even say, cellulosic-based bioethanol. 80 million liters is already enough to run more or less 200,000 tons of cars. In total, we reduce CO2 with 350,000 tons. It's massive. But here is a challenge, 215 million total investment. And then how could we finance it, and how could we find a solution? We started in 2015 with the project, and we were lucky to get 2 grants from Horizon 2020, grants which enabled us to go much further in the engineering. So in fact, in 2017, we had already engineered the whole steel and oil plant and also the Torero plant, which was de-risking quite some elements as what is the total capex, what is the efficiency. So we could already quite de-risk this with initial Horizon 2020 grants. And I think that's a key success factor. But the biggest challenge we were facing since 2015, I think that's also an important learning for all of us, was legislation and regulatory framework. Is this ethanol bioethanol? It was a $1 million question since 2015. Actually, to minimize the risk, we added and combined it with Torero. That was our initial thought. In 2016-17, with the Commission and with we were lucky that there was a review of the Renewable Energy Directive, and that at the end of 2017, this type of recycled carbon-based products is now recognized also in the Renewable Energy Directive. But that was one of the key criteria before energy, I would say, Innovin energy demonstration project could help us and could start discussing with us if they could partly finance the project. So for me, a lesson learned here is please be careful on the criteria to call your project eligible. I'm happy that Christian is very wide in his definition, but anyhow, it's very, very difficult to be technology neutral in such definition. And I think a bit on the work ongoing on sustainable finance, when I look to those texts and those criteria, they are very often already embedding some roadblocks and which are not, which suddenly a new type of technology pops up, which is great, which everybody supports, but where if you then look to the specific criteria of sustainable finance, they say, yeah, but you are not fitting in it. Of course, you can't fit in it when you are so innovative, you never fit an existing framework. And I think that is a second lesson learned. How can we faster move it? We should, for really great breakthrough innovations, recognize that this cannot be fitting with existing rules and legislation, and therefore we should be able to bypass that for the first project and move much faster. And I think a third element that where we could then successfully make the deal together with Innovin Energy Demonstration Demo is we as a project team, we really went together with EIB in splitting up all the risks. We split the price risk, the commercial risk, the technology risk, the project execution risk, the regulatory framework risk. We all split that and allocated some of the risks to some of the partners. So for example, ArcelorMittal took the commercial risk, the price risk. We all took that out of the equation so that the special vehicle, which is then left, only had to take up the scale-up risk of the technology and some of the efficiencies risks. And that was for us a way to be able to have such financing between equity and loan that based on some specific KPIs, EIB is giving us a loan, but doesn't need to have the guarantee from the consortium that if the technology fails, that this is paid back. So I think, Christian, looking to your slide of 40–60%, I think in such an innovation, or it works, and then I think we even don't need the 60% threshold, but you can always have a situation where it really fails. And then I'm a bit concerned with ETS, how when it's failing because technology is not, in spite of all the work done before, the technology is still having problems at that scale. I wonder how we can solve that. And then I would say the key role for private investors is really, and then I talk more to the banks, and Gretchen said already, banks don't want to take too much risks and can't take too much risks, of course. But how can they help us to at least quantify some of the risks and make sure that they say, okay, for that risk I can step in with some amount. I think that could be the role for the private investors. Of course, on top of the equity partners which bring in the equity. And then I would say for the public funding, it's not only money that or capital that we need up front. In this project, for example, when I look to the framework of circular economy, currently people who are collecting wood and incinerating it, they are subsidized by the municipality and by the taxpayers. But this project is not eligible for that grant, which we don't understand. So I think public money should always look to the highest added values for society. If we can recycle instead of incinerate, let's stop the subsidizing for incineration. Let's try to make sure that the taxpayers' money is used for projects which have the highest contribution and the highest CO2 reduction. And therefore, we as an ArcelorMittal, we are willing to bring much more in public domain information as CO2 abatement cost of technology, so that together with the public part, with other investors, we could all together make sure that money is first allocated to those projects which brings the highest reduction per ton per euro invested. I think that, and that we avoid that we spend now money on technologies which are not yet mature enough to lower the emissions at a reasonable cost. Of course, public authorities can't do that if we as a private sector don't share that information. I think that's is a last lesson that I would say. Let's all work together to create more transparency on CO2 abatement cost of technology, so that public money is allocated there where it will bring the contribution. That are a couple of points I wanted to bring into the debate and that we can hopefully have afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Very, very useful. I would say I was in particular interested by the way in which you say that ArcelorMittal is trying to reduce the CO2 emissions and how this would be financed. So that was very interesting. But then, of course, on the steel and mill project, I must say I appreciate as well how you go about it, how you had to look at the risks, the different risks, how you try to spread them and so. And then in the recommendations you made on things to be looked at. Now, in this respect, I heard you saying as well that you had, before this financing, you had as well some Horizon 2020 financing. And this is something maybe I would like to say as well for everyone who's listening now. The Commission has decided that as of next year onwards, our agency will be managing, apart from the Innovation Fund, we have a big portfolio on Horizon Europe, where we have other parts of financing, CEF, the Connecting Europe facility, and so. And what we intend to do is to really give as well a clear input and be some kind of a help desk for external people to know where they should go for financing. And because what we are insisting on, what we try to publicize or to insist on is on how we can, in particular, how projects that have been developed under Horizon on the research program, how they can be deployed in by using or Innovation Fund money or Horizon Europe money. So that's thanks for saying, for referring as well to the fact that sometimes the initial ideas maybe can come through research money and then it goes further. So that's the kind of things what we appreciate and where we will be working on more in future. Now, maybe before I ask the last speaker to step in, just a reminder maybe for those who started or who came in later than in the beginning. If you have questions, we will have a session at the end, in 10 minutes or so. We'll have a session on questions, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them now. Don't wait until the end. If you have questions in general or for one of the speakers that you have heard already, please feel free to send them to use slide and send the questions. Okay, now let's move on to the last speaker, last but not least for sure. It's José Pinheiro, who's got a very long experience in offshore wind activities, wind turbines and wind farms. And he's director of the Windfloat Atlantic project in the company EDP Renewables. That is a company that is very active in the field of renewable energy production. And they're developing the project Windfloat, which is based on a technology of a floating offshore wind farm. Now, the update information I got is that José is as well country manager for Iberia at Ocean Wind, which is a joint venture between his company, DPR, and then Engie. So, José, could you present your project that we have put on the table and explain that's also how it's leading the way to decarbonize economies? Even, of course, it's in a different sector than Carol's project. And as well, like Carol did, maybe if you could give us some lessons learned along its development, that would be useful for future interested people. Thank you.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the kind invitation once again. I will try to share a couple of slides that I have here because I think they are handy for the attendees to fully grasp the magnitude of the project that we're talking about. Let me see if I can do that very quickly. Let me know if you can see it. I hope so.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So the companies behind are clear: Ocean Winds, Repsol, and Principal Power as shareholders of the Windfloat Atlantic project. This project is right now a reality because of the success that was proved from 2011 to 2016 when the prototype was launched. The prototype was called the Windfloat prototype, also deployed in the coast of Portugal, and it was also benefited from European funding in that step of proving the technology. Okay, so it was a very important step. It took the time that it needed because this is not cell phone technology. This is a typical technology that needs more time to be proven. And then we have scaled it up for the current project that I'm going just to briefly describe to a 4 times bigger, generally speaking, floating platforms, and the corresponding also increase of size and capacity of the generating asset. So this project with Float Atlantic is located in the north coast of Portugal. It consists in 25 megawatt project of 3 units, 3 floating platforms. The disruption of the technology here is what the technology actually enables us to do. It enables us as an utility to go much further into the ocean, very deep waters, that we can say, that the fixed foundations, the conventional foundations being used offshore for offshore wind, are not able to. So this opens quite a big market and a big opportunity for companies such as us. So you can say here that we have had a strong institutional support, not only from the European Commission through the NER 300 program, but also locally from Portugal, from the Environmental Fund. But more important even is to mention that we actually achieved project finance deal in October of 2018 when we closed with the EIB through the special facility called Inofin Energy Demo Projects that was already mentioned before in this session. So this was definitely the second challenge that was overcome. We could prove first that the technology could work with the support as well from European Union, and the bankability of this technology and of this kind of projects in a pre-commercial stage through this project finance deal achieved in 2019, as I mentioned. So just a couple of pictures for you to understand the magnitude of the floating platforms being manufactured. This is in a later stage, and being towed to the installation harbor where they were finally assembled, where we finally assembled the wind turbines from the quayside of a port in the Spanish Galician area, and then we were able to tow, and this is a picture of the last and third unit being towed to the offshore site in Portugal, where now we finally can see these 3 fantastic floating platforms working and operating successfully. The challenges were many, definitely. As I said before, step 1, that it was a technology to be proven, the bankability, and this was a big challenge, because I believe that in the process of achieving financial closure and through the due diligence processes, we were very much scrutinized from the operational and technical point of view, but also from legal standpoint. We had we have gone through, and this is due to being groundbreakers and pioneers, is that we had definitely to educate a lot of the stakeholders around the table. We were continuously compared with the typical conventional fixed foundation industry, and this is not the same. Actually, it has less risks as opposed to the conventional fixed foundation, because we definitely are able to do many of the operations, logistically speaking, from a port, from the quayside of a port. So that there was a big part of education of everyone, advisors as well from the lenders, and naturally as well we had some lack of specific offshore regulation in Portugal, but that's not a criticism in itself. It was reality. We are a country, and probably the southern area of Europe is not as developed as the north of Europe, where the vast majority of the installed capacity of offshore wind is located. So that was only normal, and it's a process. So there are many lessons learned. I think that's a very important part, is to be able to have a very good coordination between state member where the funds are allocated to the project specific, and the European Commission. And I think that's there is some learning there to be done. But in general, also there were very good and positive upsides of all this process. This is a long process. If you could see the timeline again, it takes us to 10 years of being pushing this technology to go through. But it is a success. Right now, we are in a phase of targeting commercial projects, so to bring the technology to cost competitive levels. So I think this is indeed an example, and I don't want to be shining too much, but the fact is that this project and this technology behind it is the materialization of the European energy policies towards also decarbonization. This is a real example of how Europe is leading, and in articulation with private sector, and also with support from the financing sector. So I think we go full circle. I think this project definitely ticks all the boxes in terms of emissions avoidance, in terms of being disruptive from the innovative point of view. It was a process of achieving maturity in terms of technology as well, as you could see. There's definitely the scalability there, and we are in that step right now, the last one I believe that was mentioned by Christian in the beginning of the session, which is doing our best to lower costs so that the technology can even be more competitive within the energy mix of renewables in Europe, but also worldwide. So that's pretty much me right now.
Okay, thank you, Jose. I think it was a very complete presentation of your project, including how you looked at the bankability problems. There was a challenge, how you looked at the different challenges. So really very, very interesting. I think it's a very good input as well for us for reflections on the future, on how to use the Innovation Fund. So we're just on time, 12 o'clock. So thank you, I would say, to all the panel members to really where you've been able to respect the timing. We did get already some questions in, and so maybe I will start by presenting them. I'm afraid, Christian, that quite a lot of questions are for you, so you will have to work a bit more than the others, but there is a bit for everyone, so I will try to spread them. But the first question, Christian, is which was already a bit addressed, but there is a question asking whether you could elaborate a bit further on how the innovation funding could be combined with other EU or national funding schemes. And then a subsequent question, can the total public funding exceed the total innovation fund eligible cost?
So from the Innovation Fund, we can pay 60% of the additional costs. So 60% of those costs that cannot be covered by the market. So the combination with a loan program like InvestEU is possible, and it can cover not only like the remaining 40% of the additional costs, but also the remaining investment costs that are covered by the market. So this is a consideration then for the EIB or for another promotional bank that's backed up by a public guarantee, how they want to design their loan and how much they want to cover of that. So that's pretty straightforward. I think the other interesting combination for a lot of projects is what we also discussed in the first session, is infrastructure. And I think here the way forward is to separate those costs. So the Connecting Europe facility can very well finance CO2 pipelines. So we have a recent example on that. So then I wouldn't go with the cost for the CO2 pipelines to the Innovation Fund, but really keep them separate. Or another option is, like as you, Dirk, also said before, there are projects that are coming out of Horizon or that would be coming out of LIFE. So the research would be covered by Horizon. So these are past costs. And then the cost about the scaling up, that's for the Innovation Fund. So there you can combine the funds over time. Now, the most difficult and challenging one is to co-finance projects by the Innovation Fund and state aid. So member states' money. Because depending on which kind of state aid you use, there are different cumulation rules. So you really have to look carefully into the state aid rules. So for example, under the Energy and Environment Guidelines, they also adopt the concept of additional costs as we have it in the Innovation Fund. So here we are consistent. But very often like in renewables, like in many industry projects, the state aid rules set an upper limit that's also around 60% of the additional costs if you combine all public funding. So you are limited by this 60% in total. And that's often like also where we go with the Innovation Fund. There are exemptions, like for example for CCS, you can finance up to 100% of the additional costs. So this is an easy one, or an easier one, where you can combine the Innovation Fund for 60% of the additional costs, and then the remaining 40%, you can go with state aid. And we see some examples, some considerations, like in Norway or in the Netherlands, where projects are thinking of, where CCS projects are thinking about doing this. A very interesting one that will be coming up is, of course, hydrogen. And there's a lot of talk about this important project of common European interest, IPCEI, or however you pronounce then the abbreviation. And here we will need to wait for the first decision by DG Comp on how they will decide how much aid intensity they allow for these IPCEI projects. And also to which extent, with these IPCEIs, they are more on the research side, more on the production, on the rollout side. So, and then only once we have the first IPCEIs in, we can see in more detail how is there the combination between the Innovation Fund and such IPCEI projects. Of course, an IPCEI that's already existing is the Better Alliance, but this is one that's more on the research side, while the Innovation Fund is definitely much more on the scale up. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian. I have a second question for you, and then the other ones I'll let you a bit in peace, and I'll go to the other colleagues. But the second one is, which I think is a very interesting one as well, is to know What are the opportunities for small companies to apply for the Innovation Fund? And can the small scale fund, the call that will be launched, play a role? And if yes, could you maybe give some further information on the timing?
Yes, of course. Very well timed last week, and in the communication for the National Energy and Climate Plans, the Commission announced that we would launch the first call for small-scale projects on 1st of December with a volume of 100 million euros. Just to say, what are small-scale projects for us? These are projects with capital expenditures up to 7.5 million euros. So out of that, out of these investments cost, you can get 60%. So there's a simpler way how to calculate the amount of grant that you can get. We are currently working in the design of the call text, also to make it simpler, to really make it more targeted to smaller projects, maybe putting a higher emphasis on the degree of innovation. Really looking then also, okay, what could be like the idea that you take more innovative project technologies that you would like to test maybe first on a smaller scale, maybe together with your customers. So maybe you have a pioneer customer who's very interested in implementing, I don't know, a certain new type of a battery or something like this. And I think for that, the small-scale call can be very well designed. But in terms of eligibility, we will again go very broad, cover everything that we cover under the large-scale call. And I think, again, being very close to the market, very much about if you come with a new technology for the first time to the market, when the first time you want to sell it to a customer, I think then the small-scale call at a smaller scale than the large-scale call evidently is maybe a good option for you.
Thank you, Christian. Another question, maybe we can, Fred, maybe if I can ask you to give your opinion on it. Where do you see Cleantech moving in the light of new trends such as digitalization and the emergence of new business models?
Oops, I should be audible now. Sorry, had to unmute myself. Yeah, that's a big topic. Obviously, digital technology is a strong enabler for both the energy transition and the circular economy. So I won't go into examples, but there are many. Actually, we also have a Industry 4.0 fund, and that's not without reason. Because the central thesis there is that technology enables to sense our environment by IoT and vision technology, and that produces data, and the information derived from those data through algorithms can be used to improve decisions or to steer actions, autonomous or not. And within that framework, there's a huge opportunity for productivity. And that productivity can also result in less resources. And in that sense, it's very important for sustainability in general. On business models, some of these new business models are enabled by digital technology. I will introduce the term platform business as opposed to pipeline business, where we are used to make a product, sell it at a margin, and then sell it to many customers. And that's basically the business model. And of course, with platform type of business models, they are completely different value creation mechanisms that are actually quite interesting. But I am assuming that the question was also aimed at models like sharing and increasing asset productivity by using digital technology to introduce these type of models. Let me close on, very coincidentally, just looking at one company that wants to become the, let's call it the Airbnb of the circular economy. And of course, the question is out, how much economy is there in the circular economy? But these type of models will certainly help. Maybe I may make one additional comment, and it's a little bit to the previous discussion. As a venture capital firm, of course, we look at fundamental economics, and I do think that can be useful in the context of what we are discussing today, because the devil is in the detail, and sometimes some of these details can actually make or break a sustainable business case. And I think that's another argument why this collaboration is so important, and to bring expertise to the table on all fronts, so that the right solutions can be scaled up. Thank you, Dirk.
Thank you, Fred, for this answer. A question for Carol. Do you consider that ArcelorMittal will, in the short-term future, be using green hydrogen in its production process?
You hear me?
Carol?
Yeah, Dirk, you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, yes.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. Everybody looks at it. I think it's a complex question. Yes, we will definitely use much more green electricity in our process. We are working together with a lot of consortiums to see can we help with PPAs, and where can we then introduce that electricity. The biggest question of green hydrogen is definitely this, I would say, cost and scale. So when you want to have a significant reduction in your CO2 emissions, you really need to talk about 100, 200, 500 megawatt scale to have an impact. And secondly, the cost of that hydrogen is really expensive. And of course, you can't scale it up if you can't bring the cost down if you don't scale it up. So it's a bit a chicken and egg problem. Therefore, we are currently rather focusing on really developing technology that if hydrogen is available, we can use it. We can use it in the blast furnace, we can use it in the DRI plants, we can use it in the steel and oil plant. So the focus today is really on being ready to use hydrogen, I would say CO2-free hydrogen at scale. But the challenge is definitely in the high cost of it, and in the low availability of it. So, Dirk, I know that this is a bit an unclear answer, but to deliver our 30% in 2030, we believe we really need to look at CCU, CCS, circular carbon. But in order to go to carbon neutrality after 2030, yes, we see a role, much larger role of clean hydrogen, and therefore we already prepare the projects now to be ready with that rollout after 2030.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Carol. That was thanks for the answer. We're running more or less out of time, but nevertheless, I think I have two more questions for the two other panel members, so they won't escape. So I will ask them as well a question. So maybe for Gretchen. The question is, innovative technologies are often considered risky, and it can prove challenging for them to access finance. How do you think that we can solve this issue?
Well, as mentioned earlier, I think innovative projects are, as you've said, considered to be risky, and to that extent, commercial banks see it as equity risk. So there's a real need for commercial banks to then get up the learning curve in order to make these technologies bankable. But in that respect, we need the DFIs, we need the governments, and we need the venture capital firms to play a sort of starting role in helping us as banks to get this up the learning curve, because we obviously have a bit of a lower risk appetite when it comes to extreme innovative technologies which have not been proven. And in that respect, I think from an early stage, we need to work together, the project sponsors, the technology providers, the public institutions and the commercial banks need to come together. And we've seen this actually be quite effective in some of the projects that we are currently looking at in hydrogen, for instance, is that if we all come together at an early stage, we make the connections of what is being required, and we then are able to put in the checks and balances to make sure that these projects get up the learning curve and become bankable. And for instance, where when I speak to my risk colleagues, and where subsidies are involved, they always ask the question, so to what extent will the subsidies be there over the lifetime of the project? What happens if there are cost overruns at the beginning of projects, which is very typical for innovative projects? And there we really need to speak to each other between the commercial banks and the DFIs, and this needs to be taken into account in sort of policy setting in order to get us quickly up to speed in banking innovative technologies.
Okay, thank you, Gretchen. Jose, the last question is for you. One of the members or one of the participants in the session indicated to us that he has difficulties to access the Innofin program, and he would like to know how you did to get the possibility to discuss your project with the EIB.
Well, I think that in that sense, it's no surprise that the companies behind the Wind Plus, so EDP Renewables, Engie, Repsol, are very familiar with the European Investment Bank. Familiar being long-term customers of this bank, and partnerships have been developed through many years. I do know because I still, although I am now at Ocean Winds, I'm very connected with EDP Renewables, and EDP Renewables has a long track record of investments done in partnership with the EIB. So, in that sense, to reach out to EIB and take them into this project. But in this case, the Wind Float Atlantic was already a very well-known project. So, in this sense, we were. There was a mutual almost intention to get in touch with to help this project going forward. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jose. I don't know whether if one of the 5 panel members wants to make a last statement or would like to pass a last message, then I would say we can quickly do that. I don't know, just ask the floor if you have something that you would like to pass as a message, things that people who are listening now should take care of when they want to introduce a project. If not, okay, then I think we can come to the end of the session. So I would like to thank in particular our 5 members, our 5 panel members, Gretchen, Fred, Cristiano, Carl, and Jose, for the time that you invested and for your open feedback you gave on whether it's on your project or whether it's from the banking sector or from the public-private sector. Feedback, I'm sure, or I hope at least that the people who are listening found it very interesting. From my side, definitely, I think it was very useful. I would like to say as well, maybe just to remind that the first call on the Innovation Fund is open with a deadline of the 29th of October. So if for those who even got more interest or are more in the mood to introduce a proposal, don't hesitate, go for it. On our website, so on the INEA website, you will find all information you need about how to apply, what we need as documents, etc. More information on the program, so where you can address yourself. So I would say, don't hesitate, contact us if need be. I would say as well, this was the first of such seminars, but for sure, together with DG Klima, we'll organize some more in future, based as well on the experience probably of the first call, the feedback we get. So we would like to give you as well later on feedback on what were the results and how we can further improve. So it's the first one, but surely not the last one. And I get a good occasion to get all together and to give you in an hour or a bit more than an hour feedback on how things are going. So I would like to thank all the 5 members, the people from Klima and other services who have been organizing it. And then to all you at home or at office or where you are, thanks for listening in, and I hope it was very useful to you, and see you surely next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye, and thanks a lot.